Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is James Shepard. I am your host, and I've been doing a lot of research on this. I really try to stay informed and ahead of the curve as much as I can as far as technology. Right now, the payment processing industry is a pretty exciting place to be. When I got into the industry, really even 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, it seemed a little bit boring, to be honest. It was just kind of, it wasn't a whole lot of just crazy new technology that was just coming down the pike and things like that. And, but now we've got, mobile devices. So we've had, during the last 5 years, we've seen Square, Phone Swipe, many others come out with their mobile processing solutions. We've seen the tablet point of sale. We've seen really a big shift in small business owners of wanting a touchscreen point of sale system. Now we have the near field communication, or NFC, where people are paying with their phones, and that's coming down the pike. You have many other services that are really jumping into the payments industry right now. I'm thinking of solutions like Level Up, Groupon, even PayPal is doing some interesting things, and then of course EMV compliance, which we're going to talk about today. So a lot of technology changes, a lot of new things, and so that's exciting for me because I know that big change always equals big opportunities. Whenever there's big change, there's always going to be big opportunities. And, the important thing is for you to be able to get a hold of the opportunity yourself rather than letting your competitors or someone else, get their opportunities at your expense. Okay. So today, as usual, we're not going to dive in too much to the technical side of this topic. I'm going to give you some additional resources where you can get even more information on EMV compliance. Number one, EMV is really all about risk. On average, annually right now, roughly $4 billion is lost because of fraudulent transactions. Okay? Now, currently the risk is spread out and very little goes to the merchant. In other words, the actual business owner themselves doesn't really have any risk as far as a fraudulent transaction, other than non-compliance issues and things of that nature, where if they do something that is blatantly obvious to be non-compliant, then they may be liable for some fees or some penalties. But as far as the actual value of the fraudulent transactions that are created, the merchant has really nothing to do with that. That's all covered by the card brand associations and the acquirers, and so that's not really, has nothing to do with the merchant up until right now. PCI compliance was really a way of getting around EMV. Okay. Magnetic stripe cards are easy to copy. So what happens is this, guys. In the entire world, every other developed nation, if you take the U.S. out of it, then 70% of businesses around the world outside of the U.S. are already EMV compliant, which again, I'm going to explain in just a second what that is, but they're EMV compliant, meaning they can accept an EMV transaction. Okay, in the U.S., now it's obviously a lot higher, but as of about 6 months ago, it was not even registered. In other words, the number of merchants that were compliant for EMV was so low that they didn't even do a survey. It wasn't even able to do a survey to figure out. It was like less than 1%. It was so tiny. Very, very few merchants are currently able to be EMV compliant. Okay, you would be hard pressed to walk into any small business in your community and say, "I'd like to use my EMV card, my smart card. Can I use that here?" Okay, it would be very difficult for you to find somebody that was EMV compliant. It's just almost non-existent here. Now, what is EMV compliance? Well, EMV compliance has to do with a chip technology. Now, the magnetic stripe on the back of your credit card is actually very, very easy to copy. There is already lots of technology out there for things like gift cards, for instance, where you can, or I'll give you a real easy example. Many of you have been to a hotel before, and when you get to the hotel, what do? Well, they make you several cards, room keys, right? And they have a magnetic. Usually, most of them are magnetic, have a magnetic strip either on them or in them, and they can just real quickly run them through that machine and copy them. Well, The credit cards, of course, are a little more difficult than that because you have to actually create the card itself to look like a credit card. But as far as the magnetic strip that lets them operate, those are really very easy to copy. And so that's a major cause of this fraud that goes on in the U.S. And this $4 billion that gets lost every year. Now, up until just recently, the reason that EMV technology, now again, let me back up for a second. So EMV is the chip that's actually in the credit card, okay? So there's actually a chip that's in the credit card. Rather than having a magnetic stripe on the back of it, you actually slide the card into the terminal, and the terminal will read this smart card. And the smart card is very, very difficult and expensive to copy. I mean, it would be a major technological accomplishment to copy someone's chip. Very, very difficult. Then on top of that, many EMV cards are going to require PIN. It's called chip and PIN. So you not only have to enter the card that has your unique device, your unique little chip in there, but then you're also going to have to enter a 4-digit PIN for your transaction when you're at a retail location. So those transactions are going to be virtually impossible for somebody to manipulate in a fraudulent way. Okay. Now, some EMV, it's not all chip and PIN. There is going to be some EMV cards where it's signature. Okay. Now, this EMV really hadn't taken off in the States really at all up until recently, and the reason why is that there really wasn't a strong motivation to do it. Now, I know $4 billion in fraud seems like a pretty big motivation, but that really isn't the biggest motivation. And what happened is that $4 billion was very stable. It was very predictable. It was built into the cost structure of the payment processing industry. So people just kind of accepted it. Magnetic stripe cards have worked great in the U.S. for decades. And, the other thing is there's a lot of cost involved with switching. The people who make the credit cards, the issuing banks, they have to actually pay to create all these new cards that have this expensive chip inside of them. And that's obviously very expensive. That's a huge cost for them. Then all of the merchants around the country, millions and millions of business owners are going to have to buy a brand new credit card machine that is EMV compliant. So, it was one of those things where in the U.S. we were like, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it. We're good. We don't need EMV. Well, something very important happened. Now, again, as we look back here, Canada right now, 70% of their merchants are compliant. 30% of all sales in Canada are done with EMV cards. Okay. What happened that caused this all to take place is really three things happened. Number one, NFC technology is forcing hardware upgrades. So all of you are familiar with mobile payments, where someone can use their smartphone through Google Wallet or through ISIS or one of these other brands, and they can use that to actually pay by using their smartphone. And obviously that's going to become more and more prevalent. So in order for people to do that, these business owners have to be able to accept a NFC, which means they have to get a new terminal anyway. So this is the merchants all realize, hey, this is a time where big changes have to be made. Now, also something that many of you really may not understand is that larger merchants, their processing is much, much different than smaller merchants. So merchants like Walmart, Target, CVS Pharmacy, large retailers like that, they basically pay interchange plus zero with a 0-cent transaction fee. Okay, these large merchants, they actually deal directly with Visa, MasterCard, and they what they do is they work through these acquiring banks, and it's very complex financial structure. I'm not going to get into that, but the idea is whatever they decide to do kind of trickles down to all of the other small businesses below them. Okay, because if Walmart starts accepting a certain kind of payment, then more and more consumers are going to be likely to start using that payment, and then those consumers are going to expect to be able to use that in the pizza shop around the corner. So that means the pizza shop has to do what Walmart does. So the large retailers really make a lot of the big decisions for the payment industry, and they kind of negotiate with Visa and MasterCard and Discover and American Express. They negotiate with these major brands to work deals out. For instance, the Durbin Amendment that many of you are familiar with that really changed the debit card processing, that was almost entirely a result of lobbying efforts by Walmart, Target, CVS, and this kind of collective group of large retailers. those retailers wanted to reduce their credit card processing fees. All they pay is interchange fees. So they came up with the Durbin Amendment, which allowed them to lower their interchange fees. So suffice it to say that these major retailers have a huge pull. So they worked out a deal with Visa and MasterCard. And here's the deal they worked out. Now, all of you are familiar with PCI compliance. PCI compliance means that a merchant needs to be compliant in the way that they handle credit card information. Now, for large retailers and large restaurants, large businesses that are what we would call a tier 1 business, they have major millions and millions of dollars of invested money in PCI compliance, because every year they have to complete an annual audit by a PCI compliance vendor, and these audits cost them literally millions of dollars. And these auditors come in and make sure that everything is PCI compliant. They're from Visa and MasterCard, and they make sure that they're handling credit card information correctly, because obviously if there was a breach with somebody like a Walmart, that would be a major issue, and potentially millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions could happen if there was some kind of a breach there. So they're required to do this huge PCI annual thing. And what happened was Visa and MasterCard said, look, we want everybody to start using EMV, because if you start using EMV, it's going to save us this $4 billion in fraud, because people are not going to be doing fraudulent transactions. So they did two things. They made two big changes that impact businesses. Number one, for these major retailers, they said, look, if 75% of your transactions are done on an EMV compliant terminal or hardware setup, then we are going to completely eliminate your PCI compliance fees. Now, again, like I said, you're talking about millions of dollars in savings for these large retailers every year, and so that really allowed them to justify making these hardware changes to be able to accept EMV cards. And again, they kind of wanted to change their technology anyway, because they want to be able to take near-field communication, the smartphone devices, all right? So these major retailers were like, hey, you know what, this is a good deal, we can get rid of the PCI fees. Now, on the flip side, though, and this actually impacts small business owners in a huge way, is that what happened was the liability for fraudulent transactions, when we get to the date, which we're going to get to in a minute, of compliance, the liability is going to now shift to the business owner, to the merchant, for transactions that would have been not fraudulent if they accepted an EMV card. So it's really going to have a big shift. So because of those two things, a huge positive and then a huge negative, big motivators for these major retailers, they are all now on board and moving towards EMV compliance. And the last thing is that the issuing banks, they're also now on board with investing in the cards, because again, they now see it's kind of like it's kind of a thing where everybody has to do it or nobody's going to do it. So now that all the big retailers are on board, then the issuing banks are like, okay, well, I guess now we can pay the money for these cards because everybody's going to be using them. So let's go through a few important points here. Okay, number one, what are the real dates? And this is what the question I got from Michael earlier. So here are the real dates for EMV compliance. Okay, April of 2013, which obviously already passed. All credit card processors now. Different companies like that, the major processors, they all had to be able to accept an EMV card. Now, that didn't have really any effect on us or on your business owners or anything like that, but that was the first date, was April 2013. All processors had to be able to accept EMV. If a merchant had hardware that was programmed to accept it, they had to be able to process EMV transactions and be up and running on the EMV network. Okay, so that went off without a hitch. October of 2013, which that date actually just passed, that was when there was the initial change in PCI fee structure. Again, let me emphasize, not for small business owners, okay? Because again, we're not talking about the self-assessment questionnaire. We're talking about actual PCI audit fees for large tier 1, tier 2 type of companies that have to have major PCI audits on a regular basis. This year, in October, they got, I think it was a 50% break on their PCI fees if they were up to the EMV standard by this date. So what that means is that just right now, you're going to see that most large retailers now accept EMV cards, and the reason is that they want to save on the PCI fees, okay? And if they haven't got it yet, they're moving in that direction because they want to be able to save those fees before their next audit, okay? October of 2015. Now, this is the date that you guys all want to remember, okay? October of 2015, that is the actual date when small business owners need to be EMV compliant. In other words, every small business owner by 2015 needs to have a credit card terminal that accepts EMV smart cards. Okay? Why? Well, that is the date when the liability is going to shift to the non-compliant party. So what the card brand associations and the acquiring banks are going to do now is, Visa and MasterCard have negotiated this deal where now when a transaction is fraudulent and, somebody does a $10,000 fraudulent charge on somebody's card, they're going to trace that charge back in the chain to the person who was non-compliant. And so if the processor was non-compliant and didn't allow their merchant to accept EMV cards, then the processor is going to be liable for that $10,000. Now, you can be sure no processor in their right mind is going to be that person. So all the processors are going to be compliant. So guess who it's going to go to? It's going to go to the merchant. So the merchant, if they're not compliant and there's a fraudulent transaction, that liability could potentially be shifted to them. And so they could potentially get a bill from Visa or MasterCard for $20 or $30 or $40 or $50,000 for those fraudulent transactions if the fraudulent transaction was fraudulent because they did not accept EMV. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say we have a person who has an EMV compliant card, and you get somebody who takes that card and copies the magnetic strip on the card, and they go to a store that doesn't accept EMV. Well, if they did accept EMV, then they would be putting it in as a smart card. So it's because they didn't take EMV that this fraudulent transaction happened, and so they're going to be liable for it. Okay. Now, the only other date, now this is an important date to remember, guys, because in our industry, we've already got like hundreds of these little processing companies calling your merchants and saying you have to be EMV compliant. October 2013 is the change date, etc., and they're saying things that are true but are very misleading, and they're getting merchants to lease these EMV compliant terminals when there is absolutely no reason, there's no motivation for the small business owner right now to accept EMV other than convenience for their clients. It's not like it's a absolute, must-do thing right now. Okay, so that's important for you to realize. That's not going to come until October 2015, but it is coming right around the corner pretty quickly in a couple years here. And in the meantime, a lot more people are going to be starting to use these smart cards, and so you need to be prepared for that. Okay. October 2017, the pay at the pump and ATM machines, they get an extra 2 years. And the reason for that is because of the enormous expense involved. That way, these people have, 4 or 5 years to let their current technology become obsolete anyway. And then they're going to have to replace these ATM machines that aren't EMV compliant. And they're also going to have to replace, pay at the pump if it's not EMV compliant. Okay, so they have a little bit more time, again, because of the enormous cost involved with doing that. Okay, what is the actual requirement? So the actual requirement is that if they want to be what's considered EMV compliant, 75% of their transactions have to be processed through an EMV compliant terminal. Okay, and again, that particular requirement is really more for your large retailers and things like that, but it's a good baseline even for small business owners that want to avoid any liability issues. By October 2015, fraudulent transactions will be billed to the merchant if EMV compliance is the cause. So that is really the salient point, or the interesting point for small business owners to understand. So what should you do about all this information? Number one, educate your merchants now, okay? It is absolutely imperative that your customers, your merchants, understand this right now, okay? Your merchants need to know that you are on top of this, that you already have EMV compliant terminals ready to go, and that as the time is right, you're going to go ahead and switch their terminals out for an EMV compliant terminal. Now, also, some of the terminals that you guys have been deploying, like some of the VX510s and 70s, they do have the smart card reader already in the front. They just need to be reprogrammed for EMV compliance. So again, the processors will look at that, and they will they will make these adjustments as needed, throughout the year. But the people who are really going to be hurt by this are people who currently own their own terminal, or they're, let's say renting a terminal or something like that, but they have a terminal that's not EMV compliant and the processor is not willing to upgrade them. then they're going to have to either go to a processing company that offers them for free, or they're going to be stuck leasing a terminal, probably from an agent who's trying to take advantage of them on a lease to get these terminals. Okay? Number 2. So first of all, again, just to reiterate, guys, you need to tell your merchants about this, because let me just assure you, they are getting calls right now, this week. They've probably gotten at least one call this week from a credit card processing company who is trying to tell them that they need to be EMV compliant now and that they need to rent this new terminal or lease this new terminal. So you need to secure your merchant portfolio by letting your merchants know you're all over this EMV compliance thing, you're all over this near field communication thing, okay? Number 2, start deploying EMV compliant terminals, okay? And also EMV and NFC, okay? They need to be EMV compliant, and they also really should be compliant with near field communication, because again, that's definitely coming down the road. That is the terminal right there. It is the VX520 from Verifone. It's a very, very nice terminal, very light, easy to kind of move around, and you can see that at the end of the terminal it has a slot where you can slide in the card, the credit card. You can slide it in so that the terminal can read the smart card, and then of course it also has the standard swiper on the side. Now the other thing about this that's kind of cool, it also has NFC, so it's also capable of accepting near field communication for things like ISIS and Google Wallet and things like that. So you can just tap your phone on the terminal and it will be able to read the NFC. Now, let me clear up a couple of other things quickly on this, because I don't want you guys to get kind of confused on this. So make sure you're deploying EMV terminals right now. Every non-EMV terminal that you deploy right now is a prospect that you could very easily lose as your competitors come in and say things about this EMV and show them, because it's totally legitimate that they 2 years from now have to be EMV compliant. And so, many business owners, out of a knee-jerk reaction or fear of this liability issue, they're going to go ahead and pay a lease or whatever it might be on an EMV terminal, and you need to make sure and clear that up with them. Okay? Number 3, mention EMV and NFC in your pitch. A couple ways, to mention it would be, Mr. Jones, let me ask you a question. In talking about, equipment, do you think that a large percentage of your clients will want to pay with their smartphone in 5 years? Okay. Now, guys, on the flip side of this issue that I was just talking about, how there's all these competitors who are going to try to steal your clients away with the offer of an EMV terminal, you can use that exact same pitch. Don't mislead the customer, obviously, but you can use the same emphasis in order to steal customers from your competitors. So when you walk into a business, you can say things to them like, hey, I noticed that your terminal here is not EMV compliant, meaning that you can't accept smart cards. Also, it's not NFC compliant, meaning that you can't accept payments when somebody uses their smartphone to pay. Now, Mr. Jones, I'm sure you would agree with me that 5 years from now, first of all, 5 years from now, you're going to be required to accept EMV cards, and you can bring some materials with you. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give you the email, the web address in a minute to get the information you need. But you can take that to your merchants and show them about EMV, and also ask them, look, do you think people are going to use their phones to pay? And most small business owners will say, yeah, I'm sure that's coming down the line pretty quickly. Well, what we do is we provide you with a free EMV compliant terminal and NFC compliant terminal, so that way you already have the technology in place, so that when those changes do come about and you're required to have them, you're ready to go. We can just do a simple update on your terminal and it's already there, you're ready to go. The other thing you might want to ask customers, and especially your customers, as a way of creating conversation, is have any processors talked to you about the need for an EMV terminal? Definitely ask your customers that, but also you can ask potential customers that and start talking to them about EMV compliance. Most merchants I've talked to about it are like, yeah, I've got a couple calls. I'm like, what are you talking about? What is this EMV thing? And it gives me a great inroad to show them that I know what I'm talking about. Level Up is really, really cool. It's an awesome business model, and it allows people to pay with their phone using a QR code. There are so many other things out there that are catching on. But the thing I want to explain to you guys is that you are currently pretty secure with Visa and with MasterCard and Discover and American Express. In other words, guys, no matter what solution people are going to use, they're going to be accessing their Visa, MasterCard, and Discover credit cards. At least that's the way it looks right now. So you don't currently need to be too worried about all these technologies just like kind of blowing you out of the water. The thing that you need to do is you need to do a couple things, okay? You need to maintain a strong personal relationship with your merchants during this time of change. That's probably the most important tip I could give you. Your biggest advantage over your competitors right now is that you are face to face with the merchant. And so if you have a good relationship with your merchants, they're not going to be switching to some other processing company or some other solution or adding anything there without talking with you first. And that'll give you a chance to educate the merchant further and to help them move methodically and purposefully towards these additional solutions. Okay, the technologies are going to roll out. You're going to have a chance to take advantage of them, but it's going to be up to you to have that relationship with your customer so that you can take advantage of the new opportunities. All right, guys. Hey, thanks so much for your time. Hope you all have a wonderful day today.